Okay, hi there, and welcome everybody to another lecture with Hempology 101 today. Thanks for that, folks, and thanks for coming. Sorry for the few technical details, and I'll apologize right off for David Bratzer not being able to be here today. We had expected a Victoria police officer here to speak with us. He's running for the school board, but unfortunately his wife took ill, and he's at home looking after her and their young child, and he's not able to make it today. We have got a later date, though. We're hoping that November the 2nd we'll be able to get Dave to come speak, which is a little closer to the election of the school board. I think it's around November the 16th. And so we still hope to have Dave come up, and I believe that lecture is Cannabis in the Media. So we can fit him in that topic as well, to be sure. But I'll mention it as well later. We do have a better room booked for the lectures. We're going to be in Club Vertigo, the big empty sort of lounge in the sub-building. So I'll mention that again later, but it's much easier to find and much more accommodating for us. So again, the lectures, though, will be happening here on the lawn as long as it's nice enough out, which hopefully will be for a few more weeks. Yeah, I guess I'm going to get into today's topic in a second, but I will just highlight next week's topic is hemp products. And I really hope that Bill Finley from Hemp & Company can come down and talk about the hemp products that are available now and show some of the stuff that's available at Hemp & Company. And I'll bring down some of the hemp products that I have. I don't have many here today, but that's next week's topic is hemp products. And then in 2 weeks' time, during the cannabis research lecture, we actually are going to have some UBC students here over for the day. So we got lots of, I would hope, fun lectures in the next while. But you're going to have to bear with me with the pot and politics lecture today. I haven't prepared as much as I should have, so I'm sorry if I'm not as sharp on some statistics as I really should be for this lecture, because politics is a really critical area obviously when it comes to cannabis reform, but I personally try to ignore them as much as I can. But that's impossible right now, to be sure, because in Canada right now we have a recently elected conservative majority government that is intent upon, in a sense you could say, simply ramping up the war on drugs. But in general they seem almost focused exclusively on people that grow and sell cannabis, because when you look at some of the new crime bills, it really seems as though we are a primary target. Now, there are a lot of other so-called criminals that are targeted in these bills, to be sure, but the C10, which was just introduced, it's not S10 anymore, it's C10, seems to have very similar mandatory minimums of 6 months for as few as growing 6 plants if it's for the purpose of trafficking. And the minimum sentences that are being passed here certainly go up with what they call aggravating factors, which in some cases are things that we wouldn't even consider. For example, there would be 3 extra months if it was in a residential neighborhood, right? So just if it was in Fernwood. And it would also be an extra 3 months if it was in a rented home. It would be an extra 3 months if there were children that were in the household. An extra 3 months if it was close to a school. So with those 4 aggravating factors, that would be a full year extra time, not just for people that are caught growing cannabis, but for people that are caught making extracts, that is cookies or hashish. The penalties for those activities, if caught and again convicted for the purpose of trafficking, and I'll get to this again in a second, if convicted of that, again, there would be an extra year mandatory minimums on top of the 18 months, so that's 2.5 years if those aggravating circumstances all factor in. And so these mandatory minimums are being passed without any opposition that can stand up to it, except it seems there may be some discontent even within the Conservative government itself. I understand in talking to my friend Steve that the numbers for the vote on C10 appear to indicate that some people, even with the Conservative government, have voted against this bill. And we're really hoping that fiscal conservatives in particular realize the folly in the war on drugs and the war on cannabis specifically. But the war on drugs in general has turned out to be a catastrophic failure. And so it's apparent, certainly around the world, that more and more countries are getting out of it. But we're really hoping that within the Conservative government itself, as the debate continues in the next few months, will in fact stand up and oppose their government on economic principles. We don't expect many people in the Conservative government to oppose this war for humanitarian purposes. They don't have that agenda. But they are really interested in money, and in the craziest way, the current global economic crisis, as it's called, could turn out to be to our benefit, because countries around the world, governments of all levels are seeing their resources shrivel up, and municipal governments, don't want to see their police time being spent, dealing with people with simple possession charges. At least, many municipalities are coming to realize that. However, with each year that's gone by, in the last several, the arrests for possession in Canada have gone up steadily. Again, I'm sorry I don't have the stats, but last year, certainly in the year before, it's gone up. I think there's somewhere around 70,000 Canadians arrested for possession last year, and convicted, not just arrested. So, because more people are using cannabis in the, sort of, and more openly in the communities, I would say, more people are getting caught. They're just not all being charged and, again, convicted. And so it's something that we're quite lucky here. There's not as many convictions, but there are still quite a few, disproportionately towards young people and people of color. And so it's something that these laws and the way they're enforced is very discriminatory, to be sure. But the Conservatives, at this point, I understand, have put plans in place to build 22 prisons and across Canada, 22 new prisons, and fixing up some old ones. So that's kind of going on right now. And the Conservatives are putting it to small communities that this is a business opportunity, right? That prisons are really good jobs, right? It's union jobs, and that prisons don't cause that much problem in the communities. So I know Port Alberni, for example, was really trying to get a prison a while ago, and many other communities around Canada, like I say, 22 in the north and other places have been told, well, that way, the criminals in your area get to live closer to home, so you don't have to, travel. So it's, those sorts of reasons have been given to these places. And so I forget how many billion I think they earmarked for the building of prisons alone. But the fact is, the Conservatives don't really have to pay for the majority of costs associated with these mandatory minimums for growing and selling cannabis. The majority of the costs are actually borne by the provinces. And one thing that people can do in Canada is to pressure provinces into speaking out against the extraordinary costs that they're going to face because of these bills. And that's not simply because they pay for the bulk of prison costs. I don't know exactly how it's divided up between the federal and provincial governments, but certainly a lot of people are going to be spending time in provincial jails here, which are already overcrowded, which are already, bursting at the seams, really, and there have been, many problems resulting of overcrowding, so that's already documented. So hence their building of more jails, which is their solution to this. But moreover, the provincial governments pay for the lawyers. They pay for the crown, essentially, in a lot of cases, and it's going to really drain the provincial coffers when these cases start getting up. And the other level of government is going to be drained as well as municipal governments paying for the policing costs. And so those costs, though, aren't actually borne by the federal government. The federal government's in this really interesting position where, you know, they create laws and you know, determine punishments, but they don't actually have to pay for the bulk of that. Sort of like healthcare federally right now at the medical marijuana system. The federal government's trying to sort of download that so that the provinces deal with it and regulate it and pay for it as part of the healthcare system, but they would have federal rules. Well, certainly the same appears to be the case with these laws, and so the federal government is really putting provinces in a very bad financial position, and are just building prisons to fill them up again. And so the Omni-Crime Bill, as it's being called, has been introduced into Parliament here, and apparently they are going to limit debate to 2 days, which I think is essentially today and tomorrow, or maybe it was yesterday. Honestly, I'm not following it that closely, but certainly it will be passed through the House of Commons, and then it still has to go to the Senate, where it gets passed, or will likely get passed, I should say, because again they've gained majority control of the federal Senate, and then it will go back to the House of Commons, where it will finally become law. It's quite likely that these new laws will come into effect within 100 days from now, which is really scary for a lot of people that work in the field, and in particular people that use and sell or grow medical marijuana. Because right now there is a legal program for people that use cannabis as medicine, but there's just over 5,000 people that have possession or licenses to possess it, and certainly a couple of thousand people with licenses to grow for themselves as well. But those licenses are being phased out. I was at a meeting with Health Canada a few weeks ago where they were consulting dispensaries, because I run a dispensary here in Victoria, and they're talking about phasing out personal licenses to grow, and instead by 2014 they'll have a selection of drug companies from which patients can choose to buy their cannabis from, and it will all be mail order. So dispensaries like mine won't be included in that model, and will still be risking the law if we sell outside of the MMAR. Now currently the clubs like mine that operate do so outside of the law. We don't have licenses to operate. But currently the courts and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms essentially protect people like me for providing a valuable service to people in medical necessity. We are really blessed with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, because I would certainly be in jail if I had kept up my work to this day without that charter being enacted. And the courts have interpreted that charter to agree that individuals have a sort of right of self-determination, and that right to choose your own medicine or medical treatment has not been sort of spelled out in the charter as much as interpreted through case law. Because law isn't just written by politicians, and that's how it is across the country. Law is written by politicians, and then police officers enact the law in the field. So the police officers interpret the law, and then when a crime is committed and a charge has been laid, that law is presented before the courts, and if the law is challenged instead of the circumstances and the evidence, if the law is challenged in Canada, the judges look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that have been granted to us, and they determine whether or not the law violates that individual's rights. Or they could determine as well that the police officer violated that person's rights. You know, if a police officer just walks up to you and starts reaching through your pockets because they smelled some pot and pulls out a bag and goes, I caught you, you're busted. Well, the judge will determine that you know, your rights have been violated and throw the charges out. They won't determine that the law is unconstitutional just because a police officer has acted in a way that is unconstitutional. That happens all the time. What we've seen in the case of cannabis was back in last century, I could say, back in the late 1990s, people that used cannabis as medicine stood up in court with doctors' evidence behind them and said, no, this law violates my rights as a person to decide what course of medical treatment that I want. And the laws were struck down as being invalid for certain periods of time until the medical marijuana program was brought into place. And that program is still not functional. Every time a club like mine challenges it in court, we get in front of a judge and go, Your Honor, I'm helping sick people out. The government's program is ineffective, it's dysfunctional. The law is unconstitutional because there isn't a working medical marijuana program, and the charges often get thrown out. Depending on the judge, sometimes people have been found guilty, but then they get an absolute discharge, and people have pled guilty. But essentially, at this point, if someone is found guilty selling medical marijuana by a judge in Canada, the punishment at best is like I say, a discharge, which essentially is no record at all. It ends up being thrown out. You can get it pardoned. It's not much of a punishment in any real sense. It's a discharge. And so that's going to change. When these mandatory minimums come into effect, from the moment they're brought into effect, anybody charged on that day or that day forward, whether it's medical or not, faces these mandatory minimums, including patients that in a few years will lose their licenses to grow. If they continue to grow their own medicine, then they will be facing these mandatory minimums. But people aren't just going to bow down here and not fight once they get charged. Just because you've been charged with an offense that has a potential mandatory minimum doesn't mean you're spending that time. You still would likely be able to get bail until the trial is heard. And it's very, very certain that maybe the first person that gets arrested under these new laws isn't medical. Maybe the second isn't. But certainly within the first 10, there'll be a medical marijuana case. Certainly, you know, within the first 100, there will be dozens of people that use cannabis as medicine that will be arguing that their rights are being violated by the poor program of Health Canada, that they've been left out of for one reason or another, and that they shouldn't be just thrown in jail for, you know, with a mandatory minimum sentence for trying to stay alive with the medicine that is vastly superior than anything that Western medicine can offer for most people. And so, having experience with the courts in this country, I'm quite certain that we are going to see judges standing up to the Conservatives and throwing out these mandatory minimum sentences. I don't know if it'll be the first trial or the second, but people will not plead guilty when they face mandatory minimums. There won't be plea bargains like there is happening now, because quite often now when people get charged with, the police charge you with every possible offense they can, and then quite often there's a plea bargain that occurs where charges get dropped in order for people to plead guilty. Or so that people plead guilty and they avoid the trial, which is quite expensive and time consuming. So the police and the Crown really like to speed things through. Well, nobody's making plea bargains if you get a mandatory minimum. You know, you're going to be fighting it every step of the way. And people are going to be appealing their decisions as well. And my experience has been certainly with some cases that if there is an appeal in a similar area, then your trial can be put off until that appeal is heard. And so I'm certain that if enough people that are charged stand up, argue their constitutional rights to grow and to use this, whether they have a medical problem or not, but just to fight these mandatory minimums as being disproportionate and arbitrary really, given the lack of a victim, really, when it comes to growing and selling cannabis, the punishment is so disproportionate to other crimes. My understanding is that with these new laws, a child rapist is subject to less criminal time than a person that grows cannabis in small amounts. And so the courts will look at these statistics and these problems and realize that, again, these mandatory minimums are completely disproportionate to what society at large considers to be the crime of growing cannabis. And so the courts really are the only refuge that we have right now against our federal government. I wish I could say otherwise, but I will just briefly touch on some of the other parties, because there is hope for the future. We have this conservative government right now. I hope the courts beat them back. Actually, starting this Friday with the Insight decision. I don't know if you followed the court case with the Insight facility in Vancouver, but the federal government's been trying to shut them down. They're provincially regulated, and the municipal government's also funding and working with Insight, but the federal government's cut funding. They want to shut it down, and they've tried to argue to the Supreme Court of Canada to do so. At this point, they've lost at every level, but this Friday morning, the Supreme Court of Canada is actually coming down with a decision on Insight, something I'm really looking forward to, and I think the timing is perfect, that just as their crime bills are passing, they're going to be told that they're wrong, the war on drugs is a failure, that we need to be treating people with a health care model, not a criminal model, and that should come straight from the top courts in this country. So Friday morning, this Insight decision's been long waited for. I'm really looking forward to it. But there is more hope for the future past the Conservatives if they get beat out in the next election. It appears as though every other major party in Canada is opposing the drug war more and more. Although I haven't heard a lot from the Bloc, or what's left of them. Certainly the NDP under Jack Layton was increasingly more outspoken against these bills. Right now, with Jack passing, there isn't a strong leadership, so they're not speaking out as much as I would hope. On the other hand, Libby Davies, their healthcare critic, has blasted the war on drugs and made that part of her career. Certainly Denise Savoie, local NDP member of Parliament, has worked with me for over a decade since she was worked as a city councillor, and she's very pro. And Jean Crowder and Randall Garrison, other NDP members of Parliament on the Lower Island here. I went to see Randall Garrison, who's the new member of Parliament for Esquimalt-Juan-de-Fuca a few weeks ago before we tried to have some rallies. And he's like, and it was about medical marijuana I wanted to talk about, and he's like, before we start having a talk right now, this medical marijuana thing, I'm not too sure about. I say we legalize it outright. Like, there shouldn't be medical nothing, right? So Randall Garrison is the Esquimalt-Juan-de-Fuca member of Parliament. Jean Crowder up in Cowichan is pretty much of the same thinking. So we're quite lucky for that. We're also really lucky to have the Green Party having Elizabeth May and getting elected here in Saanich in the City and the Gulf Islands. I've actually been to visit her in her new office, and it's really wonderful to have the first member of Parliament in the Green Party here. And she's actually been at Hempology events before. I'll make sure to try to line her up for a meeting this year. The other party to speak, though, is the Liberal Party. Bob Rae, who's the interim leader, at least for now, has been very outspoken against these bills. I've heard him in the morning news speaking specifically against the mandatory minimums for growing cannabis as being ridiculous, especially under these times of austerity where the government's trying to cut back on expenses. And crime's gone down. If you look at any statistics that have been coming out in Canada, the only crimes that are going up statistically in Canada are drug crimes, simply because police are catching us more because we're using these plants, or this cannabis at the very least, a lot more. And so it's something that the federal government, the Conservatives, are totally out of step with the rest of the people, it seems, except those that voted for them in Alberta. But it's again, aside from the courts, until the next election, there seems little that we can do about it. And so I guess that's not a very optimistic pot and politics lecture. I hope next year I'm not in jail when this lecture is going on, but I am committed to selling cannabis to sick people at any cost, and I have faced jail before. I've been arrested several times, and unfortunately that's a very real possibility for me again. So I really do appreciate everyone that takes the time to learn about this subject and help engage in any level of political discussion, whether it's with a party or a neighbor or a family, because we need to change these laws and change the people that are putting in these bad laws. But at this point, again, the most we can do is just educate people and show them that the cannabis community is not to be feared, that we are a friendly and vibrant community of people that should be embraced. And so I really appreciate everybody coming out here and helping make that point with me. So thanks everybody for coming out. I got handouts. I forgot to give them out last week. So and we got 420 coming up here in a bit, but I gotta wrap up the lecture and we'll see you all in a little bit. But again, if the weather's bad, next week we're in Vertigo at 3:30 to 4. We got Vertigo, the club sort of space in the sub building. The lectures for the rest of the year are going to be in Vertigo now. So yeah, we got a nice big room in there. But if the weather's nice, we're back here in the lawn every week, 3:30. Again, next week's topic is hemp products. Hope to have Bill Finley from Hemp & Company up here showing off all this great new hemp stuff that's available now. But thanks everybody for coming out. We got 420 coming on soon, so have a great day and smoke them if you got them.